Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stacia Dearman, the founder of Thrive, and I'm here to bring you the last segment in a series of video interviews with my dear friend, Dr. Roxanne Sukol. She's an internal medicine physician who has specialized in preventive medicine and has a strong interest in physician well-being. She practices at one of the major institutions here in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm happy to bring her to talk with us a little bit about some of the strategies that we might employ to take better care of ourselves in times of extraordinary stress. Certainly, we're in a time of extraordinary stress for the healthcare community right now with the advent of coronavirus COVID-19. But also, frequently, I find myself speaking with physicians facing the extraordinary stressors of adverse patient outcomes, malpractice litigation, vicarious trauma, and other things. So we've talked some already about the power of rest and relaxation and the power of our patterns of activity to enhance our well-being. And today, Roxanne is going to share a little information with us around our eating patterns. I know we all feel like we hear so much about food and we think we know how to manage it, but I think Roxanne really has deep insight for us into how our eating patterns interface with our well-being, with the function of our immune system and the levels of inflammation in our body that I think can impact upon our risk for chronic illness, but also with just our general sense of well-being on a day-to-day basis. So Roxanne, I look forward to hearing what you'd like to tell us about eating patterns. I know this really is probably the centerpiece of your work over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, this is my favorite pillar, no doubt about it. Plus, I love to eat. Okay, so the overarching theme of the pillar that I call eating patterns. Notice I didn't call it diet. Diets don't work, we know that, yet we keep coming back for more, and I'll talk about why in a minute. Eating patterns, the fundamental truth to understand about eating patterns is that I want to help people understand the difference between real food, which nourishes you, and manufactured calories, which entertain you. It's not the same. It's not that you can't eat manufactured calories. You can. It's just that they don't go in the plus category. I want my patients to be well-nourished individuals who sometimes enjoy a little entertainment. And I think we can all tolerate some entertainment depending upon how much stress we're under, how active we are, our innate genetic ability to tolerate some of these things. The problem in America, I believe, is that we're drowning in manufactured calories, and they're frankly making us sick. So I'm going to dive into 3 different ways that we distinguish real food from manufactured calories. The first thing I want to say is that in my mind, there's a great big box, and on the outside of that box, it says real food. And in that box are thousands of things to eat, tens of thousands, but they only come from 11 categories: fruits and vegetables, beans, whole grains, nuts, seeds, eggs, dairy, meat, fish, and poultry. Now, not everybody eats everything in the box, right? Some people are allergic to peanuts, or they're lactose intolerant, or they think that eggplant is gross, or they're vegan and they don't even eat half the things I just said. And all of that is fine, but I believe that the solution is in the box. Everything else, so everything in the box nourishes you. Everything else is outside the box. Everything with a silly name, like Fritos, Cheetos, Doritos, and Tostitos, and Pringles, what is that? Or Special K, what is that? Or there are many other ways that the food industry is also encouraging consumers to behave in a certain way, to make certain purchases that they otherwise might not buy. Like if they tell you what time to eat it, like TV dinners or Lunchables or lunch meats or dinner rolls or breakfast bars, breakfast sandwiches, breakfast cereal. That's not food.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way. That they're having to tell you, here's what you do with this.
No one needs to tell you what time to eat broccoli. It's food.
Right. There is no bad time to eat an avocado, in my opinion. I love them so much.
With you 1,000%. Yeah, so that's one way that we're being influenced. Another is when they spell a word funny to get you to buy it, like Fruity Pebbles or Fruit Loops or Fruit Roll-Ups or vegetable shortening or vegetable oil. That's not fruits and vegetables. But you're in a hurry and the kids are screaming and you're hungry and you're tired and you just grab it. So these are all different ways of telling if something's food or not. And again, it's not that we can't eat it. We can. It just doesn't go in the plus category. So now let's go back and talk about those three areas I mentioned before: carbohydrates, fats, and protein. So when it comes to carbohydrate, I want people to distinguish. I want you to be able to distinguish between intact carbs. These are whole, colorful carbs, as opposed to stripped carbs that have had all the color and fiber stripped out. Intact carbs come in 4 different varieties: vegetables, beans, fruit, and whole grains. Notice the color. Every different color is a different phytonutrient that nourishes you at a metabolic level, as opposed to stripped carb, which has had all the color and fiber stripped out. That means white flour, white rice, cornstarch, corn syrup, sugar, fruit juices, and beer. Okay? It's not a coincidence that white flour looks exactly like cornstarch and powdered sugar. We've removed the original identity of that food, and all that's left is a pile of white powder. So when we eat white powder or other stripped carbs, we absorb it very, very quickly, much more quickly than nature intended. And it sets off a cascade of compensatory metabolic patterns that result in insulin resistance and underlie obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, elevated uric acid that causes gout, that increases the risk of gout, not to mention end organ damage like kidney disease and heart attacks and strokes, and all peripheral vascular disease. So to the extent that you can shift your diet in the direction of intact carbs, you're going to do a lot better, because everything inside that box we were talking about before gets absorbed relatively slowly, with the exception, I would say, of maybe just a few extremely high sugar tropical fruits like pineapple and mango. But except for those, almost everything you're going to eat in the box is going to be fine. And frankly, I mean, let's face it, does anyone really think that fruit is what's driving the diabetes epidemic in this country? We can all enjoy our pineapple and our mango. They're the outliers. So that's carbohydrates. So again, people are going to ask, well, do I have to only eat from the intact carbs? And the answer is absolutely not. There's some amount of stripped carb that you can eat safely. And maybe it depends a little bit on your metabolism, and maybe it depends a little on your activity level and your genetics. But there's some amount everyone can tolerate. Maybe it's 2 servings a week. Maybe it's 2 servings a day. I don't know. You have to figure that out. But basically, at the end of the day, if you're happy with how your clothes fit and your doctor's happy with all your numbers, then you have found your sweet spot, so to speak, and you can feel pretty comfortable staying there, unless some changes happen, like, for example, decreased activity or menopause, and then you might have to work a little on resetting things. But again, remember, it's not just about eating patterns, it's also about activity and rest and relaxation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if you've seen this or not, but I recently was standing in a line at a grocery store, and I looked over at the magazines, and it said, "Can't lose those last 5 pounds? Go to bed." So it is starting to reach the popular awareness that rest and relaxation does have something to do with our metabolism and what we weigh and so forth. Okay, on to fats.
Okay.
Okay, so when it comes to fat, we're going to divide fats into two categories also. The first is what I call nourishing fats. And these, for sure, pretty much everyone agrees on the role of avocados, olives and olive oil, dark chocolate, deep sea fish, all the nuts, all the seeds, peanut butter, chia seeds, flax seeds, sunflower, pumpkin, etc., all the nuts and all the seeds. These are super nourishing foods. And even though we grew up in a time where we were taught, if you eat fat, you're going to get fat. None of that, that is not true. And my guess is that that contributed significantly to the explosion of the diabetes and obesity epidemic. So why do we want to eat nourishing fats? Well, first of all, our brain is made mostly of fat. So if you want your brain to work right, you want to eat fat. Secondly, every single cell in your body is surrounded by a cell membrane that's made, and that cell membrane is not just a placeholder. It has an active, important job keeping what has to be on the inside, and keeping what has to be on the outside, and only letting certain things in at certain times, under certain conditions, and only letting other things out under the same types of situations, circumstances. So this is a really important job. And if we're eating fatty acids, which are the letters that make up the words that we call fat, if we're eating nourishing fatty acids that have a place and a role in creating those cell membranes, then our bodies are just going to work better. As opposed to when we eat fats that were invented in the 20th century. I feel pretty strongly that soybean oil, corn oil, vegetable oil, what vegetable? Cottonseed oil. When did cotton enter the food supply? And even canola, which stands for Canadian Oil Association and is not the name of a food. These are not foods. And we didn't eat these before the 20th century. And they're in everything processed. I want to take a minute now to talk about commodity-based eating. In life, you have a choice between quantity or quality, and you can't have both. So when we choose to eat foods that are made from commodities like soybeans, corn, and wheat, especially highly processed, stripped white flour, we're choosing quantity over quality. And the solution to obesity and related activities is, first of all, obesity is not an overindulged state, even though many people believe that. This is why diets don't work, by the way, because diets are based on denial. And denial will only work if you're overindulging. But if you are already not overindulging, then it's just going to backfire. And that is what happens, is that people find themselves back where they started or even worse. And that's because obesity is actually a malnourished state. And when we improve the nutritional value of the food we're eating, our clothes start to fit better.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why it's so important to me to help people see the difference between things that nourish you and things that entertain you. And I also want to say that anytime the food industry tells you what kind of food it is, like fast food, junk food, processed food, that's not food. You don't need anyone to tell you what food is. You know what it is already. Talk about truth in advertising, processed American cheese food. Just that combination of words is, it tells you everything you need to know about the place for that item in your diet, which is to say, not in your diet. So as opposed to stripped carbs, which I think we can all tolerate some of, I really don't want people eating those highly processed, those ultra processed fats really at all. To the extent that you can stay away from them, I think you're doing yourself an enormous favor. They're not food, and they're causing all kinds of inflammatory reactions and metabolic dyscrasias in our bodies that that we would all be so much better off without entirely. So peanut butter, yes. Soybean oil, no. Now, there's a number of fats that I didn't mention yet, and these are mostly fats that come from animals. And I know that there's a tremendous amount of argument in my field from highly respected clinicians and scientists about whether there's a place for these fats in our diet. And people I respect very much say definitely, and people I respect very much say absolutely not. And so I'm not going to say whether I think we should be eating these foods, because I think they both have a something valuable to contribute. What I'm going to say is that I think that the solution may be simply personal. And what these people have figured out is what works best for them. And therefore, it's incumbent upon each of us to figure out what works best for us. And we're moving targets too. You know, we don't stay the same from the beginning of our lives to the ends of our lives. And so a decision you make this year about how you're going to eat doesn't have to be locked in for the rest of your life. You get to change things up as often as you want to, even every day if that's what you decide. So those fats in the middle are all related to the protein source that they come from. And therefore this is an opportunity for me to transition to talk about protein. When I talk about protein, in my mind, the most foundational issue surrounding protein is quality. My great-grandfather was a butcher in New York City, true story. There were no signs in the window that said grass-fed beef. Why not? Because
there was no other kind.
Correct. You have to ask yourself, what are we doing? Okay, so we have come to a point in our society where if you want to eat what humans always ate, you have to buy your food with a retronym. What's a retronym? A retronym is a prefix word that gets added to a word whose meaning changes. So some of my favorite examples are black and white TV. Like if I say TV, no one thinks black and white. I have to say that if that's what I meant. Dial phone, rotary phone is another good one. Or my favorite one is biological parent. So these are not distinctions that we would have made 50 years ago. But if we want to invoke that meaning, we have to use those words. And so that's kind of emblematic of the changes in technology over the last 50 years. But the question I have is, what are they doing in our food supply? Our food has not changed, but the word wheat has changed. So if you want to buy the kind of wheat, say that we made bread out of 150 years ago, you have to specify whole grain flour. There are many examples, and this just shows how pervasive the problem is. Pastured, free range, organic, wild. Okay? This is so concerning. And this, I think, speaks also to the fundamental importance of identifying items that are of higher quality, that nourish us, as opposed to items that entertain us. You can also see here now why fast food is so cheap, because it's made entirely with commodities, and they don't nourish us. And that's why we get sick when we eat them.
Yeah. Well, so, think about that film, what was it, a few years ago, or maybe even 8 or 10 years ago now, Super Size Me?
Yeah, that's a, yes.
The documentary that featured the guy who volunteered to eat only fast food for what, a year, I think? And even within a matter of days, he was saying how terrible he felt, how miserable he felt, and, you know, uncomfortable in his body.
It might even have just been a month. I can't remember, but I actually was thinking about that when I was just saying this. And I remember he also had a rule that if they said, you want me to supersize that, he had to say yes. They offered.
Makes me feel sick to think about it.
Yeah. So let's get back to this idea of being kind to yourself. whenever I ask a patient to take something away, I always offer them something to replace it. So if I have a patient who's drinking a soda every day, I don't say you can't have that. I say, let's think about why you might be drinking that soda. You might, maybe you're thirsty, or you like the bubbles, or you like the sweet, or you need the caffeine, or you like taking a break at 3:30 on the way to the vending machine and talking to Joe, So that's, if we can identify what is working for you at the time, then we can figure out something to eat or drink instead. If it's the caffeine, maybe unsweetened iced tea and a piece of chocolate. You can eat an ounce of dark chocolate every single day. It's not candy, it's food. It nourishes you. And if you want to buy dark chocolate with nuts in it, even better.
Mm.
So that's one example. Another might be to teach patients to what they can eat for breakfast instead of a bowl of Fruit Loops, And the answer is, first of all, whatever's in the refrigerator that's left over from dinner would be a great choice. Or maybe you could just have a spoonful of peanut butter on a spoon and eat it in the car on the way to work. Or maybe a bowl of lentil soup. Or the fact is that you don't need to eat food that the food industry tells you is for breakfast. That list, toast, bagels, muffins, waffles, pancakes, cereal, biscuits, bread, that list happens to all be strict carb. And it's all white flour and sugar. It's not a coincidence that that's the list. We've been taught how to eat these items that don't nourish us, and we're living with the consequences now. So to the extent that you can figure out something to eat that's really food for breakfast, I think people do better. And it can
it's a complex societal equation, isn't it? That at least here in the United States, we've long subsidized the growth of wheat, corn, soybeans in the name of saving family farms, although I think many family farms are not exactly what was saved. So these become the less expensive item for the grower to grow. It's turned into a food, once it's stripped, turned into a food of low quality. But truthfully, breakfast cereals are not the least expensive breakfast. So from the vantage point of the purchaser, the person looking to eat breakfast or to offer their family members breakfast, we're buying an expensive product that is offering us very little for the money we're laying out. If we really sat down and did the math, we could probably all eat an orange and, as you say, a tablespoon of peanut butter and maybe a slice of whole wheat toast or good cheese and feel better. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are so many ways to parse this. It's very interesting to me how the food industry has been so successful at getting us to eat certain foods, or food-like items, as Michael Pollan calls them. So here's a question. When I was in Puerto Rico a few years ago, I saw that they stacked the margarine in big towers in the aisles. So it wasn't refrigerated. So here's my question. If we don't refrigerate corn syrup at the supermarket and we don't refrigerate Crisco, then why are coffee whiteners in the refrigerated section?
That's a good question.
And my suspicion is to make it seem more like cream.
Yeah.
And that's where I draw the line. It's not cream. In fact, it's not food, and it's making us sick.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I have to say about the eating patterns arm of these, this pyramid with all these pillars. And again, I don't think we need to do this perfectly, not anywhere near perfectly. We just need to start to take a more critical eye at the things we're actually eating and seeing if there's some way we could change up one particular thing that we do and make it a little bit better, or maybe get ready to do another one at some point. I'm not telling people what to eat. I'm not telling them how many calories they have to eat or giving them a meal plan. I'm just giving people tools so that they can kind of try and help to nourish themselves better and then see how they feel.
Yeah. Well, even doing things 5–10% better, and then in another year or two, 5 or 10% better again, really adds up over time, I'm sure.
It sure does. And you'll see a lot of improvement in people's triglycerides and in their blood sugars and their blood pressures and in their how their pants fit, which is one of their favorite ways to tell if their clothes are fitting better. Then they know they're on the right track.
All right. Well, thank you, Roxanne, so much for talking with us about all of these aspects of physician wellness. I hope that you've enjoyed listening. I hope you'll visit Roxanne's blog, yourhealthisonyourplate.com. If you wish to reach out to her, you can reach out to her there. You can also find a link to her TED Talk and take a listen to a little further discussion of her views on nutrition. Thanks again for joining me.